All right, thank you all for being here. I am here with the lovely Hannah Rae Rinse. Yes. As a guest, it was a pretty busy weekend for Hannah, so to have her here is really special, so thank you very much. And Jeremy Fiebig.
Jeremy Rae Fiebig. I just wanted to share that we share middle.
Oh, is it R-A-E too?
No, my sister's is R-A-E though. Does that count?
Yes, I say yes. I wield my power. Yes. Thank you so much for being here. One of the things early on, when we first got the rights to do Shakespeare in Love, I remember, I think it was Gerard and I got this text from Jeremy who's like, with everything that's going on culturally right now, I don't want to ignore the fact that the play we're doing is essentially about drag. And how do we kind of lean into that in a way that's respectful of the community? And so, first thought is, of course, I was like, oh, I have somebody definitely to talk to. What is really interesting is the connections between, I think, what Shakespeare's initial reasoning for, I guess the cultural reasoning for, and how that shifted, and then also kind of connecting that to today's drag culture. So I'd love to start off with asking Jeremy if you can tell us a little bit about the nature of gender and casting roles during Shakespeare's time.
Sure. So I think I have a two-part answer sort of here. I'll start with the theater one first. So during Shakespeare's day, women did not perform on the stage at all, ever, except, and I'll talk about the exceptions in just a second, but basically every play that you know from Shakespeare, all the women were played by boys whose voices hadn't broken yet, hadn't gone through puberty yet. So Juliet, boy; Beatrice, boy; Cordelia and King Lear, boy; Ophelia, boy. All of them boys. And there's some question about why that was. For a long time, until several years ago, the thinking was that that was a legal thing, that it was against the law for women to perform on stage. But there's been some recent scholarship, including from a former student of mine, Jessica Shearmeister, which indicates that it wasn't a legal thing at all, but it was a preference thing, as in audiences preferred boys on stage to women, in part because boys were better. They were more highly trained. And I say that knowing all of the things we might think about that coming out of my mouth right now. But boys were better because boys went to school and girls didn't. Boys had the education in rhetoric, and girls didn't. And so that's not to say that girls weren't eventually trained in something, and they were, especially in dance. And that was the exception, that later in the period, women were allowed on stage in some things called masques, which were like themed parties at court. But that's really it. From the time theater begins, pre-Shakespeare, until 1642, only males on stage. Then there's a civil war in England. We'll not recount all of English history for you, but for about 18 years, all of the theaters are officially closed. And when they reopen in 1660, Charles II is king. He is raised in France, where they have women on stage all the time, and he brings that tradition with him. And from that point on, women are allowed on the stage. The other thing I just want to mention is gender in Shakespeare's day works very, very differently than how we think about it today. So today, romantic couples are the center of kind of intimate relationships. And I mean emotional intimacy, physical intimacy, all those kinds of things. They're the center of that. Couples are. And in Shakespeare's day, it was not romantic couples doing that. It was same-sex friends that were the center of intimacy. And those same-sex friends were, so in other words, it wasn't husband and wife, wife and wife, where all the intimacy and the center of emotional life took place. It was with your best friend. And usually that was a same-sex person. And usually that intimacy included like all the emotional stuff. And sometimes it included the physical stuff too. So sometimes those people were lovers, but they didn't think of it in quite the way we would today. It wasn't queer to them. It was just the way things were. And that, when you put that alongside, like, at the time, and you'll see some of this in the play, women in particular are still thought of as sort of chips to be traded for property and things like that. That's still going on. That begins to make a little bit more sense, but that's my long answer to a very short question.
No, that's a good answer. And I know this seems like a big shift, but I do want to ask you how you got your character, when you started doing drag, and kind of the origin of that, and how you developed Hannah.
Well, Hannah kind of morphed. I didn't have like this like angelic epiphany. I actually performed in the early 2000s when I was in college under a different name, and things were just completely different then. And I performed a couple times. And while I was in Charlotte, and because I went to UNC Charlotte, so when we started having a conversation about bringing drag back consistently to Fayetteville, my friend and he reached out because he had seen and knew, though I kept it very quiet, that I was a retired drag queen at that point. And Chris reached out to me, and he's like, I think it's time to dust off the heels. And I was like, honey, I don't even know if I can anymore. I was like, it's different. It's different than it was in the early 2000s. In the early 2000s, you could stop at the local drugstore, get 3 makeup products, go to the Goodwill, grab an old prom gown, and find a wig, at the flea market that somebody would get rid of and slap it together, and boom, bang, there you were, you're a drag queen. But now it's like everything is contoured and eyebrows and jewels and cinched, and it's very competitive. I mean, so I had to prepare myself. And what's interesting enough is back in the day, I used to really look at my very first performance was the opening song to The Nanny. So
I didn't expect you to say that.
yeah. So everybody laughs. They're like, I love The Nanny. And if I was ever, and you can ask my husband, he finally made it.
Yeah,
100%. And I've actually met Fran Drescher personally. I had the pleasure of meeting her personally. I actually met her, Donnie Marie Osmond, and Betty White at the same time. It was epic in Las Vegas. I'm telling you. But Fran Drescher was lovely, and I actually told her that I recanted that story. But my husband actually talked me into finally getting rid of the gown. I use that term very loosely. The gown that I wore for my first performance, and it was a hologram snakeskin, very tight, very small gown. And I remember with fondness, and I was like, how am I going to change like that feeling of excitement for me? And so I thought about my clients, my friends, the people I look up to. When I see small kids and I see them, with their teachers, and I remember having one teacher. Her name was Miss Brennan, and she was so fashionable, and she was so edgy. And I remember, mind you, I was raised around a lot of women. I grew up watching like Design Women, Gold Girls, and things like that. Now here I am in 2nd grade, and I go up to Miss Brennan, and we're waiting in line to go to the lunchroom, and I look at her, and I thought it was a compliment. I looked at Miss Brennan, and I was like, you look like you've got 3 inches of makeup on. Only because I heard Blanche Devereaux say that to somebody. And the way that Miss Brennan handled herself in that moment made me think of when I was coming to the persona, what I wanted to project as Hannah was definitely like that Southern expectation, that Southern gentility, that like you raise up, like no matter what, you always have a little bit of a smile and grace with you. Now, but behind closed doors, that's a different.
It'll bless your heart.
You're gonna bless your heart, honey. Yeah, give me a mojito and a julep hotel. But yeah, so that's how.
Have you ever performed both genders in the same production?
Yes.
Yes.
The one that's come to mind was in college. I was in Candide and played a woman, and I can't remember why. But I just remember that, yes.
So one of the things I've always been curious about is how you're able to do that switch in a way that doesn't just stereotype one gender against the other. Or maybe you do, maybe that's part of it, is overacting of it, which I know is also part of drag. So I wonder how you communicate that change in a way that, in a way that feels honest, but also is like reflecting to your audience that there's a clear change happening.
Well, I can answer that sort of from a director perspective, maybe a little bit more and a little bit on the Shakespeare side. So in Shakespeare's day, there were like prescribed gestures and like ways of carrying yourself, some of which are documented, that the boys trained to do, who were going to play Cleopatra or going to play Beatrice or whatever. So there was like a school or technique of like playing women that was sort of codified in a way. Today, I haven't directed Shakespeare in Love, but I had the privilege of watching Jim direct it, and we have both men playing women and women playing men throughout the piece. And I don't recall any direction during the process about it at all. In other words, it was left entirely to the actor, and most of them have chosen, the exception of the actress Matera who plays Viola, the main character who dresses up as a man, throughout changes her voice just a little bit, a couple scenes. Nobody's doing anything special. It's all signified by costume. And so you put on the skirt when you're a woman, you put on the pants or the wig, or in another version of this, Viola wears facial hair as Thomas Kent. We didn't want to mess with that. So it's just a code, and the code is the costume and the makeup.
I think it's true telling too. It's like, speaking as a perspective of drag queen, it's one of those things where I always say like my pronouns when I'm in drag are she, her. When I say drag, it's not just the makeup, it's, and my husband probably will be able to explain this a little better. It's like my persona, my mannerisms, everything changes the moment I put my wig on. I can have my makeup on, I'm sitting there in pajama shorts and a t-shirt with my makeup on, but it's almost like that completest, that final piece. And at the same time, it's just that I know everything, as RuPaul says, it's like we come into this world naked, but everything else is drag. It's about paying homage and respect to that gender more that you're performing, and it's not to do it in jest. It's a lot of work. I tell people it's a lot of work to look this cheap, but at the same time, it's just like if I see drag kings, which is a very underserved and under-respected side of drag, when we see them, they are there to add light to and not make fun of. And I think that is where, especially in a lot of plays that I've seen even in college and on my private time, it's a celebration. So it's there to represent in a good way. It's not meant to be as necessarily good. Now there are times where I build up leaking joke. We have Mrs. Doubtfire. We have we go down the litany list of actors that have done comedic roles. But I think there's still a level of respect there of how much work it takes to gender swap. It's a lot of work, and it's the mannerisms. It's a lot of practice. It definitely is. I can't imagine being an actor and having to do it in a combined timeline to play both genders or multiple genders or non-binary. I don't know which way I'm doing. Like I said this morning, it's like I think I said to you, it's like I have been in drag so much lately that I actually scared myself coming out of the shower because I had been only looking in the mirror with makeup on, and I was literally I come out of the shower and I was getting ready to say, okay, I'm gonna do this morning, and I'm just giving myself my pep talk. And I look and I was like, oh God. I was like, I get some lashes on because I am right now. And that was like, it was like a comedic moment. And I think that a lot of actors probably do the same thing. It's like, they have put themselves in the mindset, they are, they're there. And that's to me the ones that really convey that. I think of Robin Williams, and specifically Mrs. Doubtfire, when they're doing the, trying to figure out which which role he's going to play as the nanny, and he goes through all the ones like look like Barbara Streisand and everything, and watching him switch so effortlessly shows the level of respect and love for what he's doing. And I think that's where the difference is.
Give me a really good segue. I'm going to ask you a slightly difficult question. Because I think there has been a lot of, I think a lot of the memes I think both of us have shared, we're talking about, I'm thinking of course Mrs. Doubtfire, Tootsie, like all of these roles that we say like this has been around, like this isn't the new thing. But the difference is that people seem to have a problem with it when it's gay folks. And there's this difference.
100%.
So I do wonder if, do we dilute the issues that, that these are specific communities of people being targeted by being like, drag has always been around? I don't actually have an answer to this. I'm really curious because I have the same reaction too, where I'm like, but we're keep on going to men who do this as a character,
Yes.
as opposed to what you're saying, which is a character and also part of your identity.
It truly is. So that is a truly difficult question, I think, for every person's situation, so I answer it differently. So I hope I can give it justice by answering it. I've used the conversation of Mrs. Doubtfire and different things, but I also remind myself of going to the extreme of like maybe White Chicks. Where not only were they gender bending, but they were also ethnically changing who they were. And so when I sit there and look at two heteronormative males, cis males, that were doing this movie, not only were they, like I said, they were changing their ethnicity as well. I don't think it dilutes it. I think it gives it a level of relatability because you're not making fun of it. You're making fun of the situation. You're not making fun of the character. Even to the point there was a little lesser known movie called Sorority Boys. It's another one where they get kicked out of the sorority and the only place they can find a place to live is or they get kicked out of the fraternity and they have to conform to the sorority. Funny movie. But it was I think had a very strong message. And I think that's what it is like if you are seeing somebody that is dressing different than what you would perceive as their gender that they were assigned at birth, I don't believe they are adding anything bad into the world in terms of what they're projecting. In terms of the memes and what we're seeing of like Tootsie and everything else, it's giving us a remembrance of this has been here. This is nothing new. And even with the laughing and joking, remembering the jokes of Mrs. Doubtfire and Tootsie and everything, it's remembering that laughter knows no gender. Acceptance knows no gender. It's all in how it's presented and what's around it. I am not talk politics, but I believe that this is a political pawn just to turn attention to this easy to pick on the 1%. And drag queens and transgendered as a cultural normative, we are of the 1% of the people in the United States. And it's easy to pick on the 1% because it's hard to look at the 1% get up and go and say no more. But also I always remind myself the zonal rights were started because of 1%. So we will sit there, we'll take it, but be prepared for when we're done. Because we'll be done. And we'll still love everybody. And that's the thing, it's like when I see somebody dressed in drag, a drag king, a transgender, non-binary, and there were so many people I had the pleasure of performing with Pride Fest, and there were so many, and I even have to catch myself, I'm old school, I'm old queen. I mean, I'm only, however old I am.
You worked at the Bilo when I worked at the
Yes, Bilo and Nectar. But there were kids that come up to me, and I couldn't help but get emotional. And I had to remind myself, ask what their pronouns are. Because that's something new, that's even for us, it's new generation, it's like having the assumption, and even myself, I have to catch myself, to the point even in my business, on my hair salon, 97% of you guys know that. In case you didn't, that's your fault. So we are actually in the process of gender erasing our services. So we're getting rid of women's haircuts, men's haircuts, in terms of that terminology. And I think that that's what it's doing. It's like, so to answer your question, do I think that it's making it muddy? No. I think what it is starting a conversation. It's bringing people to the table. It's adding more seats. It's kind of like our friendship group, our family that we have. When we have a party at our house or have a get together, I never know how many chairs to have at the table. The thing is, we always have space. And that's what we're doing, is by doing this, we're creating space. Sure.
No, it's great. I want to bring this back a little bit before. I think if we have time for a question or two, I'd love to do that. But I would love for you to talk a little bit about how Sweet Tea Shakespeare approaches casting and gender roles, and how that does or doesn't relate to original practices.
So we embrace cross-gender casting all the time. Roles, if you look at your average Shakespeare play, 80% are written for men, and the others are been written for those boys. When we cast, I mean, just the reality, the sort of labor economics of putting on any theater production anywhere at all ever in the United States today is that you have more women auditioning than men. And so it's a sort of easy justification for us to say we're going to do cross-gender casting, because we need women to play some of those parts. So the question for us becomes, how are we going to gender those roles once we cast women in them? And our practice is, for the most part, to let the actor choose. And that is, although you're about to see a production where that is not true, where all the women were directed to play men, and that was specifically because of what the play is about. But in basically every other setting, we switch. And the other piece is that we do make an effort, when we can, to switch the other way as well, to have men play women in spots where that makes sense. And again, the labor economics kind of push against that, but that's the practice. In terms of original practice, so it was all males on stage all the time. I mentioned the exceptions of the masks. There was one other exception. There's a play about it called The Roaring Girl. There was the equivalent of a drag king, we would call it. Her name was Molly Frith in the period, and she appeared on stage in the sort of what we would call pre-show to a play about her / him, depending on how you want to apply present pronouns to that particular situation. So that was another exception. But we see the casting situation as a way of trying to equalize the situation. If we're going to do tons of Shakespeare plays, how do we do that in an equitable way? And the equitable way is to provide opportunities to whoever wants them and let them generally gender themselves in their own choices. There's something else I was going to say and it slipped my mind, but those are the basics.
We have time for a question or two if anybody has any. I knew it'd be you.
I have one prepared.
I knew you would. Thank you.
Is there anywhere in your screening, particularly clearly, where as an actor or a director you noticed in Shakespeare, like, oh, this thing that was written about a woman's role clearly was written by a man, workshopped by men, and doesn't feel realistic to women maybe because of that? And how do you deal with that when you're staying true to your source material but also trying to stay true to the reality of this is supposed to be human beings.
So there are so many examples of women characters in Shakespeare trash talking their own sex. And there are plenty of examples, and you'll see some in the play, of men trash talking women too. I know Rosalind in As You Like It, Viola in Twelfth Night, and Cleopatra all to some degree do that. And there's commentary in Antony and Cleopatra, I think, about, like, it's sort of a meta-theatrical moment where Cleopatra is talking about how she is played by a boy who doesn't get it. But yeah, so it's all over the place. It's definitely, the male perspective is all over those characters.
But are there ways that you can change that as a monitor? Because obviously the words aren't going to change. Are there things that you do to try to plug that to bring more female perspective into it now that you're performing it now?
Yeah, mostly that goes through the actor, and they get the choice and the power to do what they want with it. But there's a sort of trick that we do at Sweet Tea that is sort of allowed because we do lights on the audience, where we allow, essentially the trick is allowing our actor to comment on the line that they're saying, kind of with a look or a wink to the audience at the time that they're saying it, so that we see that they're sending that up, or we see that they're commenting on it, or have distance from it, and we're all in on the joke. And so we do that a lot too. That's kind of our way out of that most commonly.
And we do also have the Honey series, which is works that are directed pretty much entirely, all the leadership is by women. So I think that there is also that understanding that the more you have a female perspective involved in the production process, the more you're able to answer those questions. Do you have any more questions? I have time for one. Yes, please.
As somebody who is was raised as, you know, drag is absolutely not okay, homosexuality is wrong and everything, someone who is newish to being more independent and away from that mentality, how can we support you as a drag queen and you as a director of non-conformity, I guess, to say, in our aspects, other than of course like coming to shows? Like, is there anything else we can do to show support?
Very good question. And I would say the one thing you can do is speak up, show up. And that's not showing up to drag brunches, it's not showing up to the parades and stuff. It's showing up to your city council meetings. It's showing up to the voters' polls. It's showing up when there is something that's going on, you're there. There are so many organizations to get involved with, where there are the Parasol Protectors, which is when there's an event, say there's a drag brunch and there's a lot of haters that are there, they have these massive rainbow umbrellas that they block them with, so that way the events can still go on. There's the free mom hugs, that they now have the free mom hugs and free dad hugs. I saw a bunch of them. I'm lucky enough to now have supportive parents. There was a time when I didn't, and so we created our own families at times. And sometimes being that family and searching out to be that family for LGBTQI plus community is important. Also, just reaching out to people. 45% of LGBTQI plus youth contemplate or attempt suicide. That's one of the things that gets me emotional, is to know that. And over half of the transgender community attempts suicide. Doesn't think about it, attempts it. So, checking on them, are you okay? Ask, show up. And the last thing I'll say is just celebrate and make your voice heard. I would be merely a man in a dress or today in heels, just prancing around, having my jollies if it wasn't for an audience. And if it wasn't for friends and people I consider my family, me and the family that are sitting in here today, I would not be here. But give us an opportunity to stand at the table for you. Allow us a seat at the table. When you are struggling with your identity of traditional religion to this controversy, start the conversation. We'll come have a seat at the table and we'll give you a perspective. We'll hold your hand. That's all we want is that connection. So I would say stand up, speak up. And just because Emmett knows me knows I do not go quietly, and we would love for you not to either. You know, use your voice. And the last thing I'll say too is always remember this has been my slogan for 2023. Ally is not a noun, it's a verb. It requires action. So if you want to say you're an ally, be prepared to get your hands dirty.
Woo!
That's a good way to end it. And I know that you're off to get another performance.
I know, it's just life. It is what it is. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for being here,
Thank
everybody.
you.